Hi guys, I'm Christopher for Health and Fitness The Truth. How do muscles work anyway? So there are a few things I want to cover in this video before we get started on instructional videos for specific resistance exercises, and I'll do it as fast yet comprehensively as I can. I want to talk about what muscle is and how it works. I want to talk about the concept of agonist and antagonist muscles. I want to talk about prime movers, and I want to introduce you to Ozai. So let's talk about what muscle is and how it works. Muscle is both elastic and contractile. So elastic meaning that from its original shape you can lengthen it, or you can contract it with muscle, you can bend it, you can move it from its original shape and form, and it will revert back to that original shape and form. And of course, muscle is contractile. It contracts, it shortens, and that's what makes muscle a unique tissue in the human body. Now, muscle is elastic, but it's not perfectly elastic. If it were perfectly elastic, you could lengthen it or shorten it for any amount of time, and it would then revert back to its original form once you took the force off of it that was either lengthening or shortening it or bending it or what have you. But it's not 100% perfectly elastic, which means that this elastic contractile tissue we call muscle, if held in a shortened position too long, will adapt to that shortened position and remain more shortened than its original form was. We call this adaptive shortening. It will do the same in the other direction as well. If you put a force on it that lengthens a muscle, like stretching, and you hold it there for long enough, the muscle will adapt to being in that shape or form as well, and not all the way into that elongated stretch shape that you put it in, and not all the way into that most shortened place that you put that muscle in, but it will adapt from its original form to something closer to the shortened or lengthened form that you've put it in. A perfect example of adaptive shortening would be sitting in a desk for several hours a day, as so many of us do for our jobs. I think we all know that sitting at a desk for several hours a day kills our posture, but now you know what that can be referred to often in my field of expertise. So this principle of adaptive shortening, especially adaptive shortening, but also adaptive lengthening, is important to understand because it gives us the foundation to understand that if you never move, you will make yourself miserably uncomfortable, and especially if you spend long periods of time in positions of poor alignment, that will definitely kill posture and make you even more miserable than if you never moved from positions of good alignment. Okay, so muscle is contractile and elastic in nature. And just to give you a brief overview of how muscle does that, let's take a very close look at muscle itself. I mean, a microscopic look. So everybody has some skin, of course, and all of us, yes, all of us have some fat in between our skin and our muscle. And if you were to peel the skin and fat away from a muscle and look at just the muscle, what you would see is this lump of red meat that is attached to at least two bones via tendons, and we call this lump of red meat muscle. Those tendinous attachment points are called the muscle's origin and insertion points. And if we started digging into this muscle and pulling it apart, we would see that individual muscles are comprised of individual muscle fibers all banded together and attached to the same origin and insertion points. And then if we dug even deeper and looked at those individual muscle fibers, we would see that each individual muscle fiber was actually made of individual smaller muscle fibers, all banded together, and these are called myofibrillars. Okay, so you've got a muscle, you go down to a smaller unit, you've got muscle fascicles, you go down to a smaller unit, you've got individual muscle fibers, go down to smaller units, you've got individual muscle myofibrillars. And if we were to look at a myofibrillar and whip out a microscope, because of course we all carry those in our back pocket, and look at a myofibrillar through a microscope, we could find the sarcomere, the functional unit of muscle. Now, in a sarcomere, there are two main strands of protein that we are most interested in, myosin and actin. Now, I've got a picture of a sarcomere, but of course that's two-dimensional, so you can just imagine a sarcomere as kind of this three-dimensional tube, okay? And sitting in the center of the tube and branching out towards either end of it is these thick strands of myosin protein, okay? And they reach out to either end, but they don't quite reach the ends, okay? And attached to the ends and branching in but not reaching the center are these thinner strands of actin. And what's happening when a sarcomere contracts is that the actin has these little arms that branch out from it, and they will reach out and bind to a site on the actin strand, and it will pull the actin in toward the center of the unit of the sarcomere, and everything comes toward the center of the unit, and thus it contracts. Now, if a lot of sarcomeres and a lot of muscle fibers shorten, then the whole muscle will shorten or contract, causing the two bones that this muscle is attached to at its origin insertion points to come closer together, and you have accomplished movement. Congratulations. Now, of course, your muscles don't have a mind of their own. They need your brain to tell them when to contract. And when your brain wants a muscle to fire, it sends a message down a nerve to that muscle. And that message travels through your nerves via an electrical impulse. An electrical impulse, of course, is the energy manifested by the interaction between positive and negative charges. And in the human body, what holds those charges? We call them electrolytes. Positively and negatively charged ion forms of elements, most specifically in the body, sodium, potassium, magnesium, and most definitely, especially when we're talking about muscle contraction, calcium. So log that away in your brain for just a moment. We'll come back to calcium and how important it is. Okay, so this electrical impulse travels from the brain down a nerve until it gets to the muscle that the brain wanted to contract. And where a nerve attaches to a muscle, the nerve and the part of the muscle that that nerve innervates or attaches to, this unit is called a motor neuron. And when this electrical impulse comes down the nerve and reaches the end of the motor neuron and fires into the muscle, what that electrical impulse causes once it hits the muscle is a flood of charged calcium ions into the muscle. And it is this charged calcium ion flood in the muscle belly itself that enables those myosin branches to bind to the sites on actin so that the muscle can contract, so that the myosin strands can pull in on the actin strands and cause each sarcomere to contract, and of course on the large scale, the entire muscle to contract. This is critical to know because now you know that calcium is necessary for muscle contraction. Where else in the body do we need calcium? It's stored in the bones, right? Of course. Now listen. It is a higher physiological imperative for you to be able to move than it is for you to be able to have strong bones. Which means if you aren't getting enough calcium, your body will pull from the calcium which is stored in your bones and shuttle it to the storage sites for calcium in and around your muscles. Your body will rob your bones of calcium in order to be able to fire its muscles. And that is why you need to make sure you get enough calcium. You ensure your bones get enough calcium by ensuring your muscles have enough calcium for their physiological imperative of movement. Okay, now about motor neurons. In a given muscle, with all the muscles we'll be interested in learning about, or with all the muscles that you're really focused on in exercise, there are dozens to hundreds of individual motor units per muscle. So my bicep might have like 50 motor units, nerves attached to areas of muscle within my bicep. Maybe 50 motor units in my bicep, okay? Now if I've been sitting on the couch for the last year and not doing a whole lot with my arms, and today I get up and I go to the gym and I do some bicep curls, right? And I demand a lot from my biceps than I've been demanding from them for the last year of doing no exercise. Your muscles will adapt to the amount of challenge you commonly give them. And so if I have 50 motor units in my bicep, but I only ever use my bicep to the extent of needing 10 of those motor units, then the other 40 of the 50 motor units in my bicep will go dormant. They will turn off. So while I have 50 motor neurons worth of strength in my bicep, if 40 of them are dormant, then really I only have 10 motor units of strength available in my bicep. And as soon as I start demanding more use out of my bicep, more of those motor neurons will turn on. They will cease to be dormant, they will get active again, and I will get more strength capacity out of my bicep. Not because I'm adding muscle to it, but because I'm turning on more of the electrical impulse capacity in my bicep. And this is important to understand because now you understand why, when you haven't been doing any exercise, specifically resistance exercise, for a long time, and then you get into resistance exercise, the first 2 or 3 weeks you see huge strength gains. And that is just because you are getting a lot of those dormant motor neurons to cease being dormant and to turn on. You're reaching your built-in muscular capacity before you build any more muscle. Likewise, when you haven't worked out for a few months or longer, and you think you look about the same muscularly and you feel about the same muscularly, you go and you work out and you're really disappointed in how weak you feel. And that's because you've been away from challenging your muscles for long enough that some of those motor neurons have been turning off. They have not been necessary for the challenge that you were providing your arms or whatever muscles you were challenging or not challenging. Good to know that those motor neurons aren't dead, they're just dormant, and as soon as you get back into the habit of working out, they will kick back on and you'll be back where you were probably within a couple of weeks if you're consistent at it. Okay, let me just briefly introduce the concepts of different kinds of muscle contraction. So if you're looking at a sarcomere, right, and you branch that out from sarcomere to the large scale of the entirety of the muscle, you're thinking, well, of course, it only contracts one way, right? It gets shorter, a muscle contracts. But there are different kinds of muscle contraction. Let me explain. There are concentric contractions, and there are eccentric contractions, and there are isometric contractions, and those are basically what we'll be working with as far as our exercise is concerned. Concentric contractions are a matter of the muscle shortening or attempting to shorten, but the space between the two bones that the muscle spans across is getting smaller. So for example, my bicep originates in a couple of different places up in my shoulder, and it inserts past the elbow, okay? Past the elbow, that's important. If it didn't insert past the other side of my elbow from my shoulder, then when it contracted, it wouldn't move my hand up toward my shoulder, okay? So my bicep originates up here, inserts down here, okay? And if I concentrically contract it, the joint space, the joint angle that this muscle spans across, the joint angle gets smaller, okay? Concentric contraction. In an eccentric contraction, the muscle is tightening, and maybe it's even trying to pull in, okay? But for whatever reason, the muscle is actually lengthening. A perfect example of this is if I grab a 30-pound dumbbell, I will be able to concentrically contract my bicep and pull that dumbbell from down by my waist up toward my shoulder, okay? If I grab an 80-pound dumbbell, I will not be able to concentrically contract the bicep in order to get that dumbbell from in front of my waist to in front of my shoulder. But I can control that weight from my shoulder down toward my waist. You better believe my biceps doing a lot of work in order to control that weight down, right? And this is what I mean by the muscle is attempting to contract, but somehow it is being forced to lengthen. Sometimes in the gym language about eccentric contractions is negative reps. So sometimes you hear about like negative pull-ups or negative reps on bench press or whatever the negative happens to be. Negatives are just when you do basically the opposite of the movement that we usually think of for that particular exercise. So for negative pull-ups, I wouldn't be focused on pulling up my chin above the bar, right? For negative pull-ups, I would, however I got there, I could jump, I could step up, or I could actually do a concentrically contracted pull-up to get up, and then I would focus on controlling myself down. And this would be eccentric contractions of biceps and lats and some other muscles. And this is the difference, okay, between concentric and eccentric contractions. Isometric contractions are where a muscle is contracting or shortening or attempting to shorten, but some other force is acting on the joint so that no movement happens at all. A perfect example of this is a plank. If I'm in a plank, nothing is moving, if I'm doing the plank properly, of course. But you better believe that several muscles are doing some work. Of course, my abs have to do some work in order to keep my spine from dipping down toward the ground. And other things come into play. But this is what I'm talking about in terms of isometric contraction. The muscle is doing work, but no movement is happening. Okay, let's talk real briefly about agonist and antagonist muscles. Okay, again, let's look at the bicep curl. If I am curling, so to speak, a dumbbell from in front of my waist to in front of my shoulder, the agonist muscle is the muscle which is responsible for that movement, okay? In this case with our bicep curl, it's my bicep. My bicep is the agonist in a bicep curl. The antagonist muscle in this bicep curl is the muscle which has the opposite effect on the joint that is moving. Okay? So in a bicep curl, the joint that's moving is my elbow. The muscle that's causing this movement, of course, is my bicep. My tricep on the other side of my arm is responsible for the opposite movement. It is responsible for straightening my arm back out, right? Antagonist muscles are an important concept to understand, because if there were no antagonist muscles, we would never be able to revert back to the position that we were in when we made whatever movement we made with our agonist muscles. Moreover, if I didn't have a tricep, then when I fired my bicep in order to get that dumbbell up, there would be no control of that movement slowing down. I would just whip my dumbbell up into my shoulder. It would probably be bad for my elbow, probably be bad for my shoulder when the dumbbell hit it. This is the concept of agonist and antagonist muscles. There are always agonist muscles, and there are always antagonist muscles for whatever the movement is that you're doing. Prime movers are something we'll bring up in all of our instructional videos. I will identify the prime movers for any given exercise that we are doing. And prime movers are essentially the agonist muscles involved in completing an exercise, okay? So the prime movers are those muscles which are primarily responsible for the movement of the exercise that is being done. I want to identify prime movers because in a lot of the exercises that we do, we tend to think of an exercise as an exercise that works out muscle group X, okay? Whatever the muscle group is that exercise works out. The truth is, in almost every scenario, several muscles are working in order to make that happen, but there are one or two or three, sometimes more muscles that are responsible for that movement overall, and we call those the prime movers. All right, now I want you to meet Ozai. This is my man Ozai. Ozai is a fully functional 2-scale skeletal model, and I'll be referring to Ozai a whole bunch in every one of these resistance exercise videos. And specifically what I'll be referring to Ozai for is for you to understand the origin and insertion points of the prime mover muscles that we are looking at for any given exercise that we go over in any instructional videos. If you know where a muscle's origin and insertion points are, then you better understand what's happening with your body, what the movements we're talking about are supposed to look like, and what you can expect them to look like. You know where you can expect to be feeling an exercise, and you know where you can expect to maybe be sore a day or two after you've done that exercise. Okay, thanks for watching. Hopefully, now you understand muscle, how it works, and why exercise, and to some extent why some kinds of good nutrition are really important. If you like what you saw, definitely hit that like button. Please subscribe, please share if you think you know anybody that would benefit from this information. If you have any questions about anything gone over in this video, please comment in the comments below. And me and Ozai will see you in the next video.